traffic. All of those little things that God gives you are infinitely better for your soul than sitting down and making up a chart of elaborate penances that you can offer.
Yeah.
And it works that way. The spiritual life works that way. In the physical life, it works that way. If you want to lose weight, it's not about the big meals you eat. It's about not eating the snacks.
Yeah.
You know, and so much of this just brings me back to Our Lady of Fatima saying the best thing you can do is accept the little crosses Jesus offers you. That's the penance that's really going to get you to heaven.
That's right. So here was Father Kieran's example of his new approach to fasting. He says, at breakfast time, I didn't have my normal cup of tea. I had a cup of hot water instead. He says it's not much of a sacrifice, is it? But the important part is that fasting must always be accompanied. It's about loving your body and loving things. But a New Year's resolution is very different from learning to love. You know, you certainly can, I suppose, through a New Year's resolution. But at the same time, a resolution is about bettering oneself or bettering society or something like that. Whenever we enter into the season of Lent, it's about really fundamentally being in the place where the Lord is, to be in His presence.
And different spiritual exercises have different purposes and different effects.
Yeah.
You know, and so the purpose of Lent is to prepare ourselves for the right celebration of the Triduum and Easter. And so it is a time of reflection. It's a time of somberness. And it is a time of penance. We ought not to
that little mini shock, a little thing done with love, really goes to the heart of the Lord. So I can't say it's going wonderfully, but
that speaks very much to the notion of the value of praying always.
Yeah,
you know, it's not so much about keeping our mouths moving or even our minds moving, but it's letting all of the things that we do become a kind of spiritual exercise.
Yes.
That are constantly returning our hearts and minds to the Lord. And
right.
your fast that way is extremely powerful. Those folks who are giving up social media, you know, I mean, I'm sure our 90-year-old elders are looking and going, those children, why can't they shouldn't have that in the first place. But I mean, that's an incredible sacrifice for a millennial who was born apparently with an iPhone in front of their face.
That's true. That's right. They
and that's a vacuum of time where if you get to fill it with prayer, you know, a phone call to somebody, you know, that you haven't spoken with in a while, share that love with somebody else. I feel like that's a successful fast.
That's exactly right. Yeah, fasting almost always involves a pouring out and not just a giving up. You know, and that's the beautiful thing about it. So Father Kieran also says, I'll offer my Lenten fasting for your intentions for those who read his blog. We'll give you the link in the show notes so that you can go and watch that. He says if you want him to pray for any particular intentions, you can also contact him on the blog. Priests like to pray for your intentions. You know, we certainly do. And I'm happy to take those crosses on myself. So you can always do that. Backchat at CatholicUnderground.com, by the way. Father Ryan likes to pray too. Your new hipster thing that Olivia's probably using.
I have my methods, thank you.
I have my methods of keeping intercession.
She has notes tattooed on the inside of her eyelids every morning. It's extremely painful, but very effective.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's how committed I am.
That's right. It's
every time she blinks, she's reminded. You know,
it's also in Hebrew, so it's a lot more little sticks. You know, it's a lot of characters there.
Oh yeah, happy Purim, everybody.
That's right. That's right. It's Purim. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well. I suppose we should just remind you, lest you have any doubt, that this is the Catholic Underground. I think. Yeah. We'll just keep on rolling. I think there's a. Oh look, there it is. Of course, we've got Ed and Katie in the video cave. For those of you who are watching us on the video feed, some of you, this is the first time watching us live. You can watch us live on Sunday evenings, most Sunday evenings. And that would be, of course, we go on the air officially at 7 Central Daylight Time, but you can catch us about 15 minutes before getting wires, crossed and plugged in.
Yes.
You can also see Olivia flying in if she's coming in for Mass, which is kind of cool, too.
Yeah, cape and all.
Cape and all.
And eye tattoos, apparently.
Apparently, yeah. Yep. So speaking of the tattooed, there's a thing out there that you probably hear on the evening news, and you might see things pop up on your news feed about it, and that is net neutrality. Net neutrality. And I know that you may have heard about it, especially with issues. Every time there's a changeover in the government, you may have heard about the White House considering changing the national policy on net neutrality. But do we really even know what it means? And I must confess, Father Ryan, that I don't always know what it means either.
Well, lucky for you, Father, I do.
My little babushka.
On the surface, net neutrality is simple enough. The question is whether my internet provider, so that's AT&T, Cox, Suddenlink, whoever you use, whether my internet provider ought to think of itself just as a pipe, as a tube, that doesn't care what comes through it. Just like your phone provider doesn't care who you call. You know, you dial a number, the number goes through. They should be neutral as to whether or not I'm checking my email, surfing Facebook, watching Netflix, pirating music, or hacking a Gibson mainframe. Those folks on the pro side of net neutrality are generally those folks who talk about your internet provider as a commodity, as a utility broker. And so they think of it as a big pipe, and they say that Comcast should have no interest in what I do. I buy bandwidth from you guys, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Easy enough.
Right.
Nowadays, that's pretty much the way that most folks do it. Nobody is signing up with AOL, for example, because they have the coolest chat rooms. You don't go with Comcast over AT&T because they're going to give you 5 free email addresses, and AT&T is only going to give you 3.
Their homepage is the best.
I mean, that sounds stupid, but I mean, in the 90s and early 2000s, that was the deal.
Yeah.
You signed up with a company because they would give you so many free email addresses, or they had certain proprietary chat rooms. So the pro side of net neutrality seems like pretty obvious. The anti side, the other side of the coin, is that Netflix accounts for 40% of all internet traffic on the planet.
So streaming data.
Streaming media accounts for almost 70% when you add YouTube and Hulu. And so these bandwidth companies are like, listen, gang, you're using a lot of the internet, and it's somewhat challenging for us to make everybody's YouTube load just like that, super fast all the time. And so it would be extremely helpful if we could find some way, to work it out so that, Joe Blow, who wants to check his email, and Gary from Starbucks, who just wants to read Facebook, they can do those things without everybody else, weeping or breaking into tears because Stranger Things is not in 4K.
Right.
So there is an argument for both sides for regulating those services and being able to limit bandwidth in order that everybody has a decent quality of service.
Got it.
And so those on the anti-net neutrality side want to allow internet providers to throttle or slow down certain types of traffic so that everybody gets to use the web.
So that might include like your Netflix streaming or your YouTube streaming, things like that. Usually things that are big bandwidth hogs.
Right. So BitTorrent and streaming are the two giant ones. Yeah.
I got you. Okay. So I think I've got it. The neutral side is it doesn't matter what I'm doing. The pro side of net neutrality, basically the internet's a utility. And the anti-side is we need to be able to throttle this because you're just using too much bandwidth.
It's so much.
But there is a discussion to be had about the common good, right? About we as Catholics, and so there is that component of it too, that we ourselves perhaps have to look at net neutrality.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of decent arguments that we are not even necessarily arguments, just questions to be asked. You're like, well, isn't there some way I could buy a plan, or what about those people who are just killing it? Can't they pay a little bit more? And of course, the hard thing for a lot of us to realize is these big companies, they hire people to find a way to get what they want, and they've also got other people who are finding a way so they can make money even if they don't get what they want.
Right.
So the hard thing for a lot of us to suck up is that whether you're pro or anti net neutrality, the big companies are still going to make money.
Right.
Either way.
Yeah.
And there's some serious concerns about privacy. There's concerns about, is the government going to spy on us? Like a lot of the problems with the previous net neutrality policies that were in place is they allowed pretty serious government spying as part of the package, and that's a concern. So there's just a lot of frustration and anxiety. And I think there's good basic questions for us to ask a podcast,
right?
About whether or not telephones should be a commodity. Because back then, you remember, you had to buy your phone from the phone company. You couldn't buy a phone from anybody. You had to buy it from the phone company itself.
And it came in 1 and 3 colors. That's right.
Or that fun clear version with all the wires.
Oh, the fun clear version. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. They tried to make computers that way too. It didn't work. So in the chat room, Mike in the chat room says, "Mama, Netflix won't share the internet again." It really does become like a sibling-y thing. And then Daniel says, "I thank the Lord above for my fiber internet," and that's not the cereal. I wouldn't thank anyone for fiber cereal.
Oh, the fiber internet.
I guess it depends on your situation. Anyway,
I concur.
Well, there's a Catholic that's over Netflix, YouTube
discussion, and that's before you even get to the morality of it.
Yeah, you got to be pro-cap.
The data cap is what you're talking about there.
No, anti-Iron Man, pro-cap.
Oh, I see. Pro-Captain America. Well, I can appreciate that.
If you're gonna get into a question of that, it's got to be pro-cap.
That's right. He stands for the American ideal, but he's a bit of a rogue when he needs to be.
I mean, Bucky's a hot mess, but you got to be pro-cap.
I think that's a given.
I think it's clear.
I'm here. That's as much as I can offer to that discussion.
That's about all you got.
Yeah,
that's
I'm here.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what. Why don't we just take all a minute to compose ourselves? You are listening to the Catholic Underground. For those of you in Green Bay who are, and of course Ed and Katie are in the video cave. For those of you who are watching us live or listening to us live, that's the way to do it. Okay, so we're still in the Lenten season, and we talked a little bit about fasting. But how about the notion that when we go into Lent, we are really going into battle, right? Mm-hmm. We're going into the desert with the Lord, and Jesus did battle against Satan with the Word of God, most beautifully. And so we ought perhaps to have some tools, some weapons for battle as well.
That's a great point too, is that Christ doesn't rely on physical stature or miracles to dispel the devil. He simply relies on himself, on the Word of God.
Yes, Christos Stomos, golden mouth, I guess.
Golden mouth. So it's a pretty good place to start. He says, "What do you say? The reading of these good books does not concern you, but I find this duty more incumbent upon you than on those living in the security of the cloister. For you who sail on the open sea, whether you will it or not, are beset by 1,000 occasions of sin. Thus the aid of spiritual books is for you a necessity. A religious cannot be wounded, because she is far from the combat. But you who are in the midst of battle must protect yourself with the buckler of holy thoughts drawn from good books."
My goodness, those who are not in orders or in the cloister are sailing on the open sea. That's a really interesting way to look at it, too, especially in the time of St. John Chrysostom, because sailing on the open sea was a dangerous place to be.
Right. It might be a death sentence.
That's right. Not just the scurvy, but everything else, right? Exactly. So, so there...
And that's the thing that
you have to protect yourself.
Yeah, you have to protect yourself. And I mean, it seems kind of like a throwaway, like, oh, you should read some books. But no, that's what he's saying is really, that's going to arm you in this battle. And Vicki Burbach, too, in her book, How to Read Your Way to Heaven, explores spiritual reading in the ways that it arms us for this battle against temptation and sin. And she says she has some like zingers that are like really topical, but also like give you good imagery in your mind. She says that spiritual reading is like jogging for the soul.
That's right. It might be a soft shape, but anyway,
is it jogging?